what does data infrastructure mean?
So data infrastructure generally means collecting a lot of data and getting insights and actionable actions out of that data that you're collecting. And during that entire process around collecting all the data and getting insights and an action plan to act on that data, like what are the different components that you need um, to make that data as useful as possible? And this can cover, going a little bit deeper, everything from how the data is transformed, how you secure that data, who has control around changing that data, and trying to understand that change over time, and then finding unique ways to get insights out of that can impact a business outcome or a life outcome that you may be working on.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. That so I guess in my mind, I sort of thought, well, infrastructure means like all that really low-level hardware stuff, like something's happening in the cloud. But actually, there's a lot more layers of infrastructure that goes right up to the software stack as well. So there's a lot more depth to this. And I like that you talked about business impact. So maybe can you just talk me through like what business problems are you trying to solve when you are going about improving your data infrastructure?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different use cases that we're kind of looking at, right? So we're seeing a lot of different use cases around the finance organization, around product and marketing. That's always been an area where data has had a massive impact. We're seeing a lot of impact around the sales and business operations side of things as well. So across functional units and also across different verticals that are getting impacted by the more recent trends in data. So it touches every single organization within an enterprise, and also different sectors as this ecosystem is evolving.
Okay, that's kind of cool that it's basically every different sort of a team. Like you mentioned marketing, you mentioned sales, you mentioned like whatever industry you're in, then more data, better data infrastructure is going to be beneficial. So I'd like to talk a bit about how you get started. So suppose your CEO says, we need better data infrastructure. What do you do first?
I think it is really important to kind of get a first understanding of all the different, where everything is sort of sits today, right? That is one of the more important things, because there's massive data sprawl within the organization. There's a lot of shadow IT. People are using some of the newer technologies like OpenAI, and trying to understand like, okay, where does all the data sit today and how are people using it? And what are the outcomes that are that the CEO and the management team is sort of looking for? Then you kind of go down the list and trying to figure out like, okay, like what are the platforms that the enterprise needs to bet on that can allow for those outcomes, that can be built for scale. So as the organization scales, they have better sort of understanding around the data usage, not just today, but 5 years from now. 10 years is hard because like the data doesn't scale linearly, it scales exponentially and sometimes logarithmically. So I think just kind of like having an eye around scaling is really critical. And then securing that data set, right? So just making sure that the core IP that is within an enterprise, and more, in my opinion, data is becoming the core IP for every enterprise across the entire enterprise sector. Just kind of making sure that the crown jewels are sort of protected, and people know like who has access to what, and kind of protecting against those breaches around either data getting leaked. And there's a bunch of issues that we've sort of seen in more recent years around that, and data like bad data getting infused into the data sets that can corrupt outcomes, and so the language learning model stuff that we're going to talk about today.
That sounds slightly terrifying, like the idea that, well, okay, maybe your data is going to grow exponentially over 10 years. Do you need to plan for that when you start building stuff? Like, have you got to try and make a prediction about what's going to happen in 10 years? Or can you work with a shorter time scale to get started?
I think it is important to kind of like making sure that you can deliver on those outcomes. But you almost have to kind of think through like your data is going to grow pretty substantially, especially now more than ever before, right? So like there was a statistic that up all the data that was generated from the beginning of time till 2020, we're generating in a year now, right? So it is quite tremendous at how quickly we're collecting data across the enterprise, across functional units, and it's not just the IT side. Where they're getting pinged around alerts around application performance. We're also seeing uh, that sort of happening on the security side, where everyone's getting alerted on all these different vulnerabilities that they have. It's also happening on business performance as well, right? So, like every time someone clicks on a button and how it interacts with an application, that informs product decisions and collecting all of that data, and those interactions are going to increase as the UI sort of changes over time. What are the kind of questions that people are asking? What are the kinds of answers we're getting? How long is someone spending time with a video that is surfaced? And that sort of data that sort of kind of is being stored now more than ever before. You almost have to have an eye for scale and have an eye for what are the key components that you need to sort of like extract from that data. Um, so in some ways, you do need to do the job today, but I think if you don't think about what's going to happen in the next 5 years from now, it's you're going to be making platform shifts every couple of years that are really costly and just slows down the organization in a massive way.